Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Jean. I'm one of the librarians here at the Malden Public Library. I'm happy to welcome three members of the New England Indie Authors Collective, Judah Leblang, Randy Ross, and Maldonian Jason Rubin. The collective is a group of New England writers and playwrights whose work has been published by independent presses, specializing in unconventional and experimental works of fiction, nonfiction, and memoir. Tonight's program has been generously sponsored by the Friends of the Malden Public Library. If you're looking for a great way to support the library, consider joining the Friends, who raise funds for our programs, equipment, and other needs not covered by our annual budget. Tonight's program will be recorded and uploaded to the Malden Public Library's YouTube channel. Please make sure you stay muted. You'll have the opportunity to ask questions using the chat function found at the bottom of the Zoom window. Without further ado, Judah, take it away.
Thank you, Jean. So yes, I'd like to welcome you all. Thanks for coming tonight. And we're going to begin kind of giving you a bit of an overview of our publishing experiences, which kind of run the gamut, including self-publishing, working with traditional presses and looking for agents and a whole lot of other things. And you'll have an opportunity again to post questions in chat, and we'll be doing some Q&A at the end of our discussion. As Jean mentioned, we are the New England Indie Authors Collective, and Randy Ross, Jason M. Rubin, and I are all based in the Boston area, and we do a variety of things. Basically, we're novelists and memoirists and storytellers, and we do a lot of different things. But first of all, I wanted to thank Jean and the Friends of the Malden Public Library for sponsoring this program. And hopefully we'll be giving you some useful information tonight that will be applicable to your own publications, your search to get your work out into the world. So just before we get into the nuts and bolts, I wanted to turn it over to Randy Ross, who is going to just give us a few guidelines around using Zoom.
Great. Thanks, Judah. As Jean mentioned, you're all going to be muted. Sorry, it just works better that way. And again, if you have any questions, enter them in the chat window. You can enter them at any time during our presentations, and we will get to them all at the end. Another quick thing is up in your right-hand corner, there's, if you move your cursor up there, there's a little item that says View. If you switch that to Speaker, that way, whichever one of us is presenting will be in the big box on your screen. And also any of our slideshows will be the major part of your screen. If you're in gallery view, again, everybody's in a small window. So again, if you want to, the best view is going to be speaker view, and you'll be able to see everything that way. And that's it. Back to you, Judah.
Thank you, Randy. So again, just to give you a sense of how the evening is going to go, I'm kicking things off, and then Jason is going to be talking about kind of getting your manuscript ready for publication, finishing your work. Then Randy is going to be talking about his experiences looking for querying agents and also looking for a traditional publisher. And then Jason is going to be talking about self-publishing, and I'll also be adding some about my experiences self-publishing my first book. So I think right now I'd like to turn it over to Jason M. Rubin, who, as Jean said, is a Maldenite, a long-term Malden resident. He is the author of the novel Ancient Tales Newly Told, and is an accomplished writer and essayist. And Jason's going to be talking about kind of, before we can publish something, getting the manuscript in shape. So Jason, if you take it away.
Thank you, Judah. Thank you, Jean. Welcome, everyone. It's great to see how many people have shown up for this presentation. Now, some of you may already have completed a manuscript. Some of you may be in the middle of one. My talk is for both groups of people because even when you're done, there's always more work you can do to ensure that your manuscript is submission ready. I started my first novel in 2006. I completed the manuscript 3 years later. That is to say, I completed my first draft. And the first thing I did when I reached the end was go back to the beginning and start rewriting. My story was based on a 17th century English folk ballad, and I wanted the narration to sound contemporaneous, as if it were written in that era. What I found was that the style and tone of the narrative had evolved over the course of my writing. It was much more formal and heavily dialectal in the early chapters than in the later chapters. So I had to do a lot of work to make the narrative voice more consistent from beginning to end. And I think that's probably a common issue. Now, I kept rewriting for the next 3 years, which is how long it took to get a small press interested in publishing it. Eventually did come out. In that time, I did probably 5 wholesale rewrites. I even added a new final chapter eventually. If it hadn't been published, I would probably still be working on it. And there's nothing wrong with that. It would probably be a better book. Today, I've had 2 books published, a third that is waiting for illustrations to be completed, and I'm 70,000 words into a 4th. Along the way, I've learned a few things about getting your manuscript in shape that I want to share with you. I call them the 5 tips for completing your manuscript. Tip number 1, ignore word counts. I know I just told you I'm 70,000 words into my work in progress, and I'm happy about that, but that's not really important. Many people working on their first manuscript started it during NaNoWriMo, National Novel Writing Month, which is taking place right now. I assume you're all aware of what it is, but if not, the goal of NaNoWriMo is to motivate people to finally write that book that they've always been meaning to write. From November 1st to November 30th, you're expected to compose a 50,000-word novel, which comes out to an average of 1,667 words a day for 30 days. My first novel began during NaNoWriMo, but I had a 3-month-old in the house, and there was no way I was going to complete it in the course of a single month. But I know a lot of people who do NaNoWriMo every year, and every day they post their daily word counts on social media. I see you, Chris. To them, a good day is when you write 2,500 words. A bad day is when you write only 250 words. But the fact is, you could write 5,000 words a day, and they may suck, or 50 words that are perfect. Now, when you go through the editing and rewriting process, you might very well delete huge chunks of those words. So it doesn't matter how many words you write, it's how many words you keep. It's not the quantity of your writing, it's the quality. That said, publishers do require certain word counts for certain kinds of books, be they fiction, nonfiction, young adult, etc. So word counts matter, but only at the very end. If you're still writing, if you're trying to meet your daily goal, my advice is to just write. Start at the beginning, stop when you reach the end. Whatever the daily word count ends up being, try to make it as good as possible, not as long as possible. Second tip, be your own worst critic. You should love writing. Writing should be the best part of your day. You should be in love with the act of writing. That doesn't mean, however, that you should be in love with your writing. It's important to be able to detach yourself and look at what you're writing with a critical eye. Now, don't do this until you're done. If you stop in the middle and critique yourself, you might never get back to it. But once you've reached the end and look back again at the beginning, you have an important opportunity to review it slightly less subjectively. As you go through every chapter, ask yourself, do I care? Is there anything here that will connect with a reader intellectually or emotionally? Is there conflict, revelation, resolution? Does the chapter advance the story? This is a deeper level of review than just correcting typos, filling in words that were in your mind but somehow never made it to your keyboard, and correcting tenses. That stuff is important, but it doesn't get to the quality of the storytelling. You need to decide if your story makes sense, if it's compelling. Does each chapter end with something that makes people want to read the next one? If not, think about how to make it better. Remember, when you hire an editor, as you should, they'll gleefully chop it up and suggest radical changes. If you've been truly critical of your work all along, you'll be able to endure and even appreciate their edits better. and hopefully they won't be as extensive as they might otherwise have been. Third tip, put stock in new beginnings. When I completed my draft of my first novel, I showed the first chapter to a friend who is a published author. She loved it, so she said, but she also said I had to change my beginning entirely. That was when I learned of this truism. Delete your first 3 chapters, and then you'll have the true beginning of your story. Now, that doesn't mean you literally have to throw out your first 3 chapters, or even your first one, or your first 3 paragraphs. But writers tend to beat around the bush with their beginnings. Every writer begins their story with one goal, to show off how clever they are and how well they can write. I guess maybe that's 2 goals. But that's not what readers care about. They just want a good story well told. And they don't need a big writerly build-up to your story. Start where the action is. My original beginning was cinematic, detailing the beautiful green landscapes of Northwest England, the sights, the smells, all the details they teach you to capture in English class. Movies can start like that because there are titles and credits and music going on while the camera pans along the landscape. Books aren't like that. Once you've opened a book, you're ready to meet the characters and find out who they are, what they're doing, and what's standing in their way. I didn't like changing my beginning, but my book was better for having done so. And it really was just a matter of moving some things around. You eventually get the smell of fresh peat in the air, but only after the main characters enter the scene. So look again at your beginning and be sure you've introduced your protagonist early and that they're doing something important that drives the action of the story. Tip 4, prepare for rejection. When you send your manuscript to agents and publishers, as Randy will tell you, you will be rejected numerous times and it will sting. That's the writer's life. That shouldn't deter you though. In fact, you should try to get as many rejections as possible because that means you're going all out to try to get published. Just keep in mind that they are not rejecting you personally. And they're not even really rejecting your work either. They're rejecting the chance that your book could be very successful. You see, they're more focused on the marketability of your story than its quality. If they don't think they can make money from your work, they won't accept it. But ask yourself, why did you write this book? Was it to make money for other people, or was it to tell the story you've been dying to tell? I'm guessing your answer will be the latter. So if you believe in your story, keep plugging away. Also, like I did, keep working on it while you're collecting rejections. In sales, they teach you that every no brings you one step closer to yes. So try to stay positive. Tip 5, keep your eyes on the prize. Writing a book is hard. It takes a long time and everything is against you. Work, home responsibilities, time, energy, endurance, other people's expectations or lack thereof of your ability to write a book and to be a successful author. Writer's block, competing priorities, not to mention pandemics, elections, and the World Series. Don't give up. Let your writing be your lifeline. When the going gets tough, the tough get writing. If you must take a break from writing, clear your mind, go ahead, but plan when you want to get back to it. Don't let it get so far on the back burner that it no longer retains heat. Not because it will hate you for abandoning it. Manuscripts are very forgiving. They will take you back whenever you're ready. Now, the problem with letting it lie dormant for too long is that you'll lose your momentum, the muscle memory. The creative well you dug may go dry. When the writing is going good, when the words are flowing, your characters spring to life for you and seem to tell you what it is they should say and do next. It's a magical thing. You don't want to lose that connection. So keep at it, keep your eyes on the prize. Now, for those who've completed their manuscript, and for those who will, this is a quote for you. It's from Andre Dubus III, author of House of Sand and Fog. When you finish a draft of a poem or a short story or novel, you make sure you go out and celebrate all night long, because whether the world ever notices or not, whether you get it published or not, you did something most people never do. You started, stuck with, and finished a creative work, and that is a triumph. So to review, here are the 5 tips for completing Oh, I'm sorry. Did I get the right one up there?
Yep.
Okay. The 5 tips for completing your manuscript. Number 1, ignore word counts. Number 2, be your own worst critic. Number 3, put stock in new beginnings. Tip 4, prepare for rejection. Tip 5, keep your eyes on the prize. Thank you and good luck. And now back to Judah. Where did Judah go?
Okay. So thanks, Jason. And yeah, one of the key issues is obviously doing your best work, basically the best work you can do at that time, and getting the manuscript ready, and so that you feel like it is representing your best work. So once you have that manuscript and you follow Jason's 5 guidelines or rules, then the question is, okay, if I want to go the traditional publishing route, maybe I would like to try to find an agent. And how does one go about doing that? And also to find other publishers that may not require an agent. So next up, Randy Ross, who is a novelist and storyteller and the author of God Bless Cambodia, a novel based on his life experience, loosely based on his life experience, is going to talk about that process. So Randy, please take it away.
Great. Thanks, Judah. So yeah, I'm going to talk about traditional publishing, which is getting a book with a publisher or a small publisher. And let's see. I'm going to be providing a lot of information. All the links and all the information I'm going to be providing will be available at the link on the bottom of this page. I'm also going to put it in the chat window. This link is at the bottom of every one of my slides. So you don't have to do a lot of writing. You can just listen to what I've got to say. And then all this information, again, will be available on my website. So just a quick update as far as what's going on with COVID, and you've probably been reading all this stuff about backlogs and supply chains and shortage of books for holidays, and it's enough to kind of get you very worked up. I talked to the publisher of my book, and they were in kind of a bad mood, and they were saying, yeah, this year they're going to be publishing fewer books. However, publishers are still publishing books. Agents are still looking for writers. I just finished a second book. I started sending it out to agents. There's plenty of agents that are looking for books. So all the noise you're hearing about how, if you've been listening, having to do with publishing, about it going down the tubes and all this bad stuff happening, ignore it. Agents and publishers are still looking for books. So what are your odds of getting a book deal? This is kind of my back of the envelope estimate. So agents receive about 100 queries a week. So in order to get a big publishing deal, you need to get an agent first. So agents typically get about 100 queries a week. That's about 5,000 a year. But maybe 2% of those pitches are either in good shape or are appropriate for what the agent offers. So maybe you find 50 agents that would be interested in representing your genre or the type of work you're doing. So 50 agents times 2% equals about 1%. So 50 agents, 2% of those pitches are good. So that's maybe 1%. Small presses, the permanent press, the folks that bought my book, they told me they get about 500 queries a year. But again, a large number of those queries are in pretty bad shape. The author has not done the work. So your odds are maybe 1 in 100, which isn't so bad. You could be that one. Okay, so getting a book deal, it's a lot like job hunting or dating. You want to find a match, and then you want to vet them. So here's an overview of the process. You're going to finish your memoir or your novel. Whether it's a memoir or whether it's a novel, it has to be finished and in good shape. Once you've done with that, you're going to write something called a query letter. and you're going to write something called a synopsis. And a query letter is a one-page pitch letter that I'm going to discuss in a second, basically describing your project, and then a little bit of a tease to get the agent interested in it. The synopsis is also a 1 to 2 page document that outlines in detail what happens in your novel. An agent or a publisher wants to see that your story has some kind of arc, that you know how to finish the story. And then finally, if you want to get a big publisher and you want to get the big bucks, you need to get an agent. So that's the first thing you're going to do. You're going to try and get an agent. If you can't get an agent, then you're going to be your own agent, and you're going to submit your book yourself to smaller presses that offer smaller advances, or some of them don't offer any advance. So my first book, I pitched it to agents. I'm going to get into the numbers later, but they weren't interested. So then I took the book, represented myself, sent it out to a bunch of small publishers, and one of them, the Permanent Press, bought it. So the query letter. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but you want to take a class or two on how to write a query letter. My first query letter took me about 2 years to get it right. The second one, the one for the book I'm submitting now, that took about 3 months. So I got better at the process. Query letter basically has 4 parts. The first part is why you're writing to this agent. So if you have a friend who's a published author, and they gave you a referral to their agent, you want to mention that right in that first sentence. Second part of a query letter is the positioning of your book. Where does it fit into the marketplace? What is the genre, if it has a genre? Who are comparable authors? So this gives an agent an idea of, can they sell it? Is this something that's in their wheelhouse, that's something that they can represent? Because not all agents represent all types of books. So my particular book, I mentioned 3 different authors, Jonathan Tropper. I said the book should appeal to all readers of Jonathan Tropper, Joshua Ferris, and Sam Lipsyte. So these are guys that write racy humor, which is what my book was about. Part 3 of the query letter is a short, snappy synopsis of what the book is about. You don't need to give the ending. You just have to have, it's got to be written, it's got to be tantalizing. It's got to get the agent's attention. Part 4 of your query letter is your bio, and for most people, you're not going to have much in your bio, because this is going to be your first book. So you don't need to worry about it. Just need to put something in there, you know, whatever you've been doing, and also if you have any qualifications for writing this particular book. So this is my first book, God Bless Cambodia. It's about a chronically single guy takes a trip around the world hoping to change his luck with love. I took a trip around the world, so I had some idea of what I was talking about. So that's the query letter. The synopsis, again, I mentioned it's the plot. It's it's 1 to 2 pages, and it's excruciating. I recommend taking a class on how to write a synopsis. So you can finding and vetting an agent or big publisher. The agent search. Where are you going to find possible agents? Again, you're going to check with any friends, family members, anyone you know who has an agent, and ask if you can use their agent. You're probably going to be very surprised at who's going to help you and who's not going to give you the time of day. So I had friends that had books published, and might have been my book, might have been me, whatever. They were not interested in sharing their agent with me. There was a guy I met at a party. I was talking to him for 5 minutes. I described my book, and he said, sure, contact my agent and use my name. So again, you don't know who's going to help you. You're going to be probably going to be surprised at who will and who won't, but ask around. Then you can also look for the agents of similar authors. So I mentioned 3 authors that were similar to my book, Jonathan Tropper, Joshua Ferris, and Sam Lipsyte. So I went and looked up who are their agents, and then I contacted those agents. Another good source of agents are writing conferences. You don't have to go to the writing conferences. Just go to the website that lists what agents are coming to the writing conference. Because if the agents are at the writing conference, they're going to be looking for writers. And then there's others, websites that have databases of agents. They're listed down at the bottom there. Let's move this. Agentquery.com, querytracker.net, Poets and Writers. They all have lists of agents, and they mention what the agents are looking for. So I mentioned earlier, authors with books like yours. How do you find comparable authors? This is a tool called Literature Map. And what you do is you enter the name of the author, and it gives you a list of authors they consider to be similar. So I mentioned Sam Lipsyte was an author that was similar to my book. I entered his name, and here's a whole list of other authors that write racy, edgy humor. Now, I didn't read all these authors' books. I looked each one of them up, Wikipedia, what type of stuff do they write? Have they written anything recently? I read a description of some of their books. And if I was really interested, then I would go to Amazon and read a longer description of the book. And if I was really interested, then I would take the book out. Another source for authors who have books similar to yours. So this is a book by Sam Lipsyte called The Ask. I just looked at the encomiums on the book. What other authors are praising this book? Often those other authors will be people with similar taste. In this particular case, it was Jeffrey Eugenides who wrote this nice quote on the cover. Jeffrey Eugenides does not do humor, so this was not helpful to me. But on the back of the book, there were a bunch of other authors who had given Sam Lipsyte a nice quote. Okay, so you've got the author. How do you find their agent? This is a website called Publishers Marketplace. It costs $25 a month. It's worth the money once you want to start querying agents. So you enter the name of the author. So this is Ed Park, another guy that does edgy humor. I entered his name, and bang, there's his agent right there. So that's Publishers Marketplace. Another source for agents. There's a website called mswishlist.com. So MS stands for Manuscript. So these are agents that post what they're looking for. Vetting the agents. One place is you can check, again, Publishers Marketplace. If you click on the agent, it'll give you information on recent sales. So if the agent hasn't sold any books in the last 10 years, you probably don't want to bother with them. Another place to look for information on agents is a website called Writer Beware. And they've got all their members write in with gripes and complaints and issues with agents they've dealt with. So they have information right there on some agents that are problems or have been problems for their members. Querying tips. So I mentioned the query letter. You're going to start emailing that once you're ready. You're going to start emailing it. I would suggest contacting 100 to 200 agents. That's a lot, and that's a big number. And the reason I have that many is I was at a conference and I was talking to an agent, and I asked the agent, so how many agents should I query? And the agent said to me, well, I have a client who queried 120 agents, and I was number 120. And the book was the Silver Linings Playbook. So it's worth sending out a lot of queries. You never know. You want to make sure that you've exhausted everything before you move on to the next step. You send out 5 or 10 at a time. Actually, the last week or so, I've been sending out 20. I kind of want to get this process over with before the holidays. But the first time I did it, it took me about 6 months. I would, once a week, I'd send out a batch of these things. Now, what if you don't get an agent? I didn't get an agent with my first book. The next step is you're going to be your own agent, and you're going to contact small presses yourself. So again, small presses, they offer smaller advances. Some of them offer no advance, but they're going to publish your book for you, and you'll have that publishing credit. You got published by a publisher. Somebody liked your book well enough to publish it and spend the money to do so. One place to look for lists of small presses, Poets and Writers. You can enter the genre that you're writing in, and it'll generate a list of small presses. vetting small presses. Again, this website, Writer Beware, they've got, their members are very vocal. If they've had a problem with a small press, they're more than happy to write in about it. So this is a good website to check for checking that. So my process, my first book, God Bless Cambodia, I 2007, got laid off from my job. I took a 4-month solo trip around the world, had a rotten, miserable, horrible time, but I kept the blog the whole time. And the blog, when I got back, I had 150 pages of kvetching and moaning and kvetching. And I spent the next 8 years taking classes and finishing the manuscript. And I finished it, I rewrote it 3 times from top to bottom. I finished it in 2015. It was 80,000 words, which is kind of a standard length for a novel, 325 Microsoft Word pages. So I queried 110 agents. Goal was 120. At 110, I was done. I was done with the process. 110, fine. 7 of the agents requested the manuscript, but nobody wanted to represent it. So step 2, I contacted 15 small presses, and these guys, the permanent press, loved the book. They wanted it. They offered me $1,000 advance. I was like, I'll take it. I'll take whatever you got. One thing that was interesting is most small presses and most agents, they want only email queries. These guys only take paper. So I printed out my query letter. I printed out my synopsis, and I printed out the first 25 pages and I mailed it to them. And 2 weeks later, I got a phone call and they said, send us the rest of your book. So I printed out the whole 325 pages. I brought it down to the post office and I sent it out to these guys, and it took about 6 weeks. And then they called me one night and said, we want to buy your book. So along with the contract, they sent me this letter, which is kind of a reality check on what to expect. And the letter went something like this. Dear author, before you sign your contract, we wanted you to know what the book world is like. Generally speaking, books by non-celebrities sell between 700 and 1,500 copies. To even ensure that many sales, it is imperative that the pre-publication reviews be good ones. So my book came out March 2017. Well, that was the publication date. The books were not available until May. It's available on Amazon, indie bookstore sites, and my own website, God Bless Cambodia. So that's kind of a quick synopsis on getting a traditional publishing deal. And now we're going to talk about the other option, which is self-publishing. And I'll turn it back over to you, Judah.
Thank you, Randy. Yeah, thanks. So I would say to particularly to memoir writers out there, as a memoir writer, I did kind of a leaner, meaner version of what Randy did in looking for. I queried about 65 agents. My book is also shorter. It's about 46,000 words, which with I think larger publishers was considered a bit of a negative because it was so lean. But that was a story that I had to tell. Eventually, I found a very small press. I did not get an advance. I would say that for memoir, it can be getting an agent can be, I think, particularly difficult unless you have a very unusual story, a la Educated or Wild, or something that they feel has the potential to be a big seller. Because the bottom line is that agents are looking to make money, and the way they make money is if they feel that you've got a built-in audience, ideally, or what they call a platform, and then also, that it will be something that they can really publicize. So I would just say it's good to have a plan A and a plan B. Plan A could be looking for an agent. Plan B could be querying mid-size and smaller presses, which can also include university presses. There's a lot of those. Some of them have very good reputations. There's also mid-sized presses like Beacon and Grey Wolf that have very good reputations that you could also query without an agent. But I think it makes sense to try the agent route first. So if plan A and B are not working, or you decide that you don't want to go through the long, laborious process of querying somewhere between 50 and 150 agents, or looking at dealing with small presses and the long process and time that it takes, another option is self-publishing. So Jason is going to be talking about his experience and some of his recommendations around self-publishing, and then I have a few things that I would add to that as well. So Jason, you want to take it away?
I do indeed, Judah. Thank you. And welcome back. Some years ago, the very idea of self-publishing was so anathema to writers that many saw it as completely illegitimate, a sign of failure even. Only if you are good enough to be accepted by an agent or a publisher did your book count. Now, that idea presupposed that agents and publishers are legitimate gatekeepers, the only ones with the expertise to judge good from bad. But the reality is that they are hustling for their lives. The publishing industry is going the way of the newspaper business. Houses are going out of business, they're publishing fewer books, and their margins for error are as slim as their appetite for risk. As I said before, they don't care about your book unless they can make money off of it. That means they need books with mainstream characters and familiar plots. A few years ago, that meant vampires, wizards, and espionage stories. And that are long enough so that they can charge a certain price for them that will hopefully lead to profits. So you see, it's not about quality as much as it is about flooding the market with more of the same. Look, no one writes books for agents and publishers. We write books in the hope of attracting like-minded people who would appreciate a good story well told, even if that's only 1,000 or 100 people. That's where self-publishing comes in. This type of thing has already transformed the music business. It used to be that if a major label dropped a band, the band broke up and became guitar teachers. They were out of the business. Now bands record themselves, produce their own CDs, and sell them directly to their fans. The indie revolution completely changed the model for making and selling music. In that example, the label heads are just like agents and publishers, serving as little more than an unnecessary, unhelpful buffer between artists and audiences. As I mentioned earlier, I spent 3 years trying to get an agent or a publisher to take on my first book. Eventually, I found a small Midwest press. A couple of years ago, I looked at myself as a 57-year-old guy with a second book in the can. The mere thought of going through all those submissions and all those rejections was exhausting. I was older and I didn't want to invest years in seeing my book come out. So I went the self-publishing route. In a mere few months, I had a very attractive book for sale, like so, with an ISBN and paperback and Kindle versions listed on Amazon and other online outlets. Now, the key thing about doing that is finding, of course, a reputable company. And Randy told you that there are websites like Writer Beware. They can tell you, who's legit and who is not legit. And, with self-publishing, you're going to pay the upfront costs. So it's important to compare prices and understand what you get. A lot of self-publishers offer certain packages that include this, that, or the other. But you need to decide on what it is you need. Do you want to have an ISBN, which makes it, kind of traceable and trackable? Do you need copy editing? Do you need cover design work? So there's lots of things that, these self-publishers offer, but, they also have, sort of first tier, second tier, and third tier, and you don't need to spend, a huge amount of money for services that you're not really gonna need. But in terms of finding out which self-publishers are more reputable than others, I actually found a website, and let's see if I can show it to you. Yeah, so here, this is from the Alliance of Independent Authors. the best self-publishing services and the worst. And they rate them all here and they color code them. So if they're green, it's excellent. They've been vetted and aligned with the Alliance's Code of Standards. And then you've got recommended, where everything is within industry norms. And then you get into the areas that you probably don't want to deal with. And they list all these self-publishers, and you can see very clearly which ones you may want to investigate further and which you don't. So I personally was searching through, and whenever I came to a green one, I would write it down. I'd take a quick look at their website. You know, are they doing the kind of books that I'm offering? Let me see if I can quickly book. I eventually went with, and I'm not saying you have to do that. I'm not endorsing it necessarily. I'm just saying I went through this process and I came upon BookBaby. They give a quote, they tell you all the services they offer. They're all, yeah, you're right, I'm not an editor. Anyway, this was a good tool. I'll put the URL in the chat. It was one thing that that really, helped me find what I wanted to, the self-publisher that I wanted to kind of hook my wagon to. So let me just get back. So if you hustle, you can find your audience. It's not like publishing houses are going all out with huge advances in marketing budgets these days anyway. This is a true story. This past summer, I had dinner with a 96-year-old former professor of physics at Rutgers, who was born in Germany and came to the US in the 1930s as Hitler rose to power. He wrote a memoir, which you can imagine is probably pretty interesting, and he self-published it. Why? Again, he was 96, and he didn't feel he was going to live long enough to go the traditional route, even though he likely could have interested a university press in his story. So ask yourself, do you want to spend your time and your life writing books or writing submissions? I'd rather write books. That's why I'm a proponent of self-publishing. Now, that said, there are some pros to traditional publishing. For one, it's not fair, but it's true that trade published books tend to have higher prestige than self-published books, which can also help you to get public readings and teaching gigs. Also, they are more likely to be distributed through bookstores and libraries, though that's not always guaranteed. And yes, they pay advances, but then you have to sell in excess of the advance to make any future money. There may even be some marketing dollars thrown your way, which is nice because when you self-publish, every sale is reliant on your own sales and marketing efforts. So I've collected the pros and cons of each method, which I will share with you now. First, the self-publishing pros and cons. Yes, if you go with a self-publisher, it will get published, but you'll have to pay for it. You will have creative control over the content, for better or worse. Editing services and publishers, have professionals who, no matter how good your work is, can make it better if they want to make it better. Yes, you'll earn more per sale. You sell a book for yourself by yourself, you get to keep all the money. However, those sales will be piecemeal, and you'll have to work for each one. And yes, it's much faster, but are you ready to start selling? It's a big job. It requires marketing yourself, and it's not easy. Trust me, trust us. It's not easy, and you have to be ready to jump right into it as soon as your book is ready. Now, here are the pros and cons of traditional publishing. Yes, there is more prestige, more bragging rights, but it's a long, slow process. Yes, you'll likely get broader distribution, but that's no guarantee of sales, especially given what's going on today in the world and the economy. Yes, you may get financial advances, but it takes longer to earn royalties because you have to pay off that advance through sales. Yes, you may get a marketing budget, but don't expect to get on the Today Show. So that's my argument in favor of self-publishing. I'll tell you good luck. And Judah has his own experiences that he'd like to share with you as well.
Thank you, Jason. Yeah, I would say I have actually let me just so I've actually done both. I have one book that was self-published and one book that was traditionally published. And as Jason has said, you know, the traditional publishing, I think, covers like a broad range from a large press like Simon and Schuster, which could potentially give you a big advance, but those are much harder to get, to a very small press like Red Giant Books in Cleveland, which is my hometown, and they published my book, which is called Echoes of Jerry. So that's the book here, and it's really pretty similar in terms of quality of the publishing to the self-published book that I brought out about 10 years ago, which is called Finding My Place. So just to tell you a little bit about my experience, Randy, could you bring up my slide, please?
Sure.
So no, that's your slide.
Yeah, one more.
But basically I became a project manager, and I wore various hats in order to see that my book got done. So what I did was I took the book, which was kind of partially laid out, and I won't get into what happened there, but basically my first book was also memoir, but it was basically a series of short memoir pieces, which I discovered pretty quickly was a hard sell, because it was considered almost like an essay collection, which generally they're not considered very commercial. So I had some interest from a small press. Eventually, I decided to bring the book out myself so that I could manage it and make sure that it came out with quality that I was comfortable with. So what I did was I hired someone I knew who had a small, fairly established press in the Boston area called Yellow Moon Books, somebody I knew and trusted. He laid out the book for me, and then I had somebody else who I had worked with in my day job for a number of years do a copy edit on the book, even though I had written and revised these pieces many times. And then in terms of the cover design, a close friend of mine who was a very talented artist and graphic designer in New York, he offered to do the cover for me. So I basically hired people I knew and trusted and pulled the pieces together. And if you could go on to my next slide there, I'll kind of just very quickly go through the steps that I followed in terms of, here are the things that on a practical level you would need to do if you decide not to use kind of a company that kind of sells you a package, but you want to kind of oversee the pieces step by step. So first of all, as Jason mentioned earlier, you want to make sure that your content is good, so that like in my case, I really wanted my book to be on a par with a book published by a traditional press. And so I put a number of years into the writing, and then another chunk of time into kind of managing the publication. But the publication piece still happened in under a year, probably in about 6 to 8 months, which is much faster than typically you would find if you were dealing with a traditional publisher, and that whole process of finding a publisher or an agent. even as an experienced writer, it's very helpful to have somebody do a line edit to really look at your text, because in my experience, when you've edited a piece 20 times, you're not going to notice those small punctuation or grammatical issues. And so it really helps to have another set of eyes and somebody who is experienced in doing this kind of revision. You want to make sure that, they say don't judge a book by its cover, but people really do. And so you want to have something that looks, that not only looks professional, but fits the theme of your book. And unfortunately, I don't have my self-published book with me today. Somebody borrowed the copy I have here at home, but I was very happy with the design. And because the designer was a friend of mine, we went back and forth several times on the concept. You need to have the book kind of publication ready if you're going to do something like print on demand. Many books are laid out in a program called InDesign. So that was a program I didn't have, but my layout person, the person who basically laid out the text of the book, he took my Word doc and basically moved it into InDesign. Getting an ISBN number and barcode. One of the things that a lot of people don't know is particularly if you want to sell your book in potentially try to get it into bookstores or established websites, you generally need an ISBN number, and you need it for each iteration of the book. So if you're going to have maybe you're going to have an audio book, maybe you're going to have a Kindle version, they need separate ISBN numbers. Generally, people go to an organization called Bowker, Bowker, and you can buy a chunk of ISBN numbers. I think you can get 10 for around $300. But you want to probably buy multiples if you're thinking that you might bring out more than one book or more than one version of your book or more than one format. You're also going to need a barcode. You can get it through Bowker, or there are other places. I think I found barcodes on the web that were less expensive. In my case, I used a publisher called Lightning Source, which is connected with Ingram. Ingram is the largest book distributor in the United States. So that was helpful in terms of getting the book into bookstores. Bookstores didn't necessarily care if my book was self-published as long as it was available through Ingram. But if you use Lightning Source, the book has to be publication ready. So I had like my designer and my cover designer, my layout person had to make sure that that they were following the specs required by Lightning Source, so that then I could just basically upload those two files, a text file and a graphic file for the cover. And then you got to do the other work. You decide on a kind of a publication date. You can try to get some reviews. One thing I learned about getting your book into bookstores, whether it's self-published or not, bookstores want the book to be returnable, which means if it doesn't sell, they send it back to the printer. If you are self-publishing your book, then you're going to be on the hook for the cost, the mailing costs for the store to return the book. And then you have to kind of tell the publisher if you want to, you want the book sent back to you, or do you want them to destroy the books? So there's a lot of financial issues in this whole process, and getting a book into bookstores, if it's not going to sell, is not necessarily a great idea. So you have to consider maybe you target some local stores where you have connections or where somebody has read your book, or if you have a way to promote it. But you have to come up with the marketing strategies and figure that stuff out. Most of the stuff in terms of marketing strategies you have to do if you're published by a small press as well. The difference is that, as Jason said, when you're self-publishing, you have to front the costs for printing the book, for hiring these people, or using a company that will charge you, say, for these services. So you're already kind of in the red, whereas if you find a traditional publisher, typically you don't have to front any money. So that is one significant difference there. But the self-publishing process gives you more control, and as Jason said, it's a lot faster. So with that, we've covered a lot of territory. Maybe we could open it up for if there are any questions, anything that anybody's brought up in chat. And Randy, maybe you can monitor that, because can't actually see it in my current
Let's see.
for me to see. I see somebody, Amanda, mentioned the Alliance of Independent Authors.
And actually, Jason put the link in there.
So that's in there.
Yeah, the whole list of
Right. And we have a comment from Karen that that the self-publishing process was relatively smooth, but marketing of the book was very difficult. And I would say that, like in my case, my traditionally published book, which came out a few months before the pandemic. So one rule of thumb is ideally don't launch your book during a pandemic. Of course, I didn't really know that was coming, but I would say that, a lot of small publishers really don't have a marketing budget, or if they do, it's minimal. So in my case, I've also found my book, Echoes of Jerry, to be very difficult, to really get out there, because there haven't been many live in-person events. It's been hard to do readings and things like that. So it's challenging, I think, whether you go with small publishing or if you go with traditional small publishers or you self-publish, I think the marketing piece is quite challenging. And I saw a question, I think, from Marcia about how do you learn about query letters and find classes, things like that. Do you want to tackle that, Randy?
Yeah, actually, I took classes on Zoom at Grub Street, which is in downtown Boston, Gotham Writers, which is out of New York. And again, these are all available on Zoom, so I didn't need to be there. So those are two good places for, I got to a class on synopsis, writing a synopsis, and writing a query letter, one at each of these places. So Grub Street, Gotham Writers, which is in New York.
Also lit, because I think Marcia's in Cleveland. I'm pretty sure that Literary Cleveland also offers classes or workshops on, on publishing and things like that. So I would also check the Lit Cleveland website.
Also, Marcia asked, what is the average cost of an agent? An agent doesn't cost you anything. If they sell the book, they take 15%. So they're working on commission. Yeah, if an agent asks you for money, run screaming in the other direction. Yeah, they're not supposed to do that. They get paid if you get paid, and they also get a percentage of your royalties. But they're like real estate agents. They work on commission.
Right, and so that's why they're looking for, naturally they're looking for stories that they think are going to sell a lot of books, because that's how they make their money. So one thing that I would emphasize is that if you do get rejected by agents, it doesn't mean that your book isn't well written. It means that they think, well, this may not be a big commercial hit. Yeah, definitely, it doesn't necessarily reflect on the quality of the book. I'm seeing a question from Mega about, said, my son is 12 years old. Can he get his book published? Jason, what do you think?
Unmute.
I'm unmuting. Absolutely. I've heard stories of younger kids than that who create a book and someone took interest and published it. The same rules and difficulties apply. Certainly he can get it self-published. I don't know what the book is about, but is there a market for it that you might want to go the traditional route? That's something worth looking for, but there's certainly no age limit on getting published. It's all about your desire and what the book is.
So
Right.
Marcia, do you want to unmute? Okay, I think we can hear you now.
No, it's
Okay, okay. So S.C. Hinton was published at 15. Okay, good. Marcia had
The hardest thing is writing the book. The other hardest thing is getting it published. And then the other hardest thing is marketing it. There's no
Right.
easy thing
right.
in writing books. It's all hard, but it's rewarding. And, if you're a writer, you're compelled to write, and you have a driving desire to see your words in print. And that's the thing you need to ride when people are rejecting you, and when you're, still halfway through your story and just can't think of where it goes next. You just need to keep at it.
Right.
And actually, I have a friend that he wants nothing to do with any of this publishing process. So he writes books, he finishes them, puts the manuscript away, and he starts another one. He doesn't even bother querying agents. He doesn't want to deal with the self-publishing. He wants to write books. So he doesn't deal with any of this stuff.
No, it's like the quote by Andre Dubus III that I mentioned. It's like, the achievement is in the writing. It's not in the publishing. It's not in the selling. The massive achievement is in completing a creative work.
And I would add, in my opinion, that the writer also has a responsibility, if he chooses or she chooses or they choose to take it on, to get their work out. Most writers want to communicate and they want to get their work out. And maybe that means selling 50 books or 200 books or 20,000 books. But, that's another, you're wearing another hat when you do that. Again, it's kind of like, first step is to produce the best manuscript you can, tell the best story you can, do the work to do that. Then decide how you want to get it out there, which way are you going to publish it, whether you self-publish or maybe you try, as Randy did, to go the traditional route. And then whichever route you go, there's work involved in, kind of trying to reach your audience. But if you believe in the work, then I believe you make some effort to reach the audience, because people will be potentially changed by reading your work. So that's the idea. I think getting back to Mega, who asked the question about her son, I would encourage him, and he can go through the process, and then hopefully at 12 years old, he's got more than one book in him. Let's see. Marcia also asked about, can a line writer be hired? I think you mean
Copy editor?
I think she corrected to say a line reader, which
it sounds
maybe
like
is a copy editor.
It sounds like you're referring to a copy editor, and there are people who do that professionally. And it may also be helpful to have somebody who would kind of coach you in your work. Again, Literary Cleveland would be a good place to start. They could point you in the right direction as far as connecting with somebody. So then there's a question from Abby here. Can any of you speak to working with or hiring sensitivity readers or editors? I'm not exactly sure what you mean by sensitivity readers. Do you mean in terms of kind of to make sure that somebody is writing in a way that is culturally appropriate, or
she's giving a thumbs up. Okay.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, that's something that one of the writing centers where I'm connected, Randy's also connected, Grub Street in Boston. We work with people as consultants, and sometimes that comes up when I've worked with individual students, individual writers. I mean, we'll talk about those issues. I don't know if that's something that, certain consultants specialize in. I mean, we all, each of us has knowledge of different cultural groups, and we have different life experiences. So, some people are going to be up. I mean, if somebody wants to talk about or write about the experiences of, say, middle-aged gay men, I feel relatively qualified to give a perspective on that. If they're writing about, issues related to Asian American women, I don't have the same cultural knowledge. I still would have ideas about, say, the quality of the writing and things like that. But, I guess it depends, I think, on what audience you're writing for. In other words, who you're writing for, who you're writing about. That may influence like which consultants you would choose. But I don't really know if there are kind of like diversity consultants for, specifically for this kind of creative writing. I'm not really sure about that.
I might add, if you were pitching a press that sort of targets certain communities or certain topics, and they offer editing services, feedback, it's hard to get feedback from a press, large or small, when you submit something to them. But if it is very specialized, you may find that they have interesting feedback to give based on their history of serving the literary needs of different audiences.
Right. Great. So let's see here. So Marcia mentioned Geek Love as a book that kind of was targeting maybe a specific audience there. Yeah, I mean, that's one of the issues, who is your audience? Who are you writing for? Who are you writing about? It could be definitely helpful to work with a writer who has good knowledge of the communities that you're, particularly if you're like, say, developing a novel or writing about a group that is not your own. It could be really helpful to do a consultation with a writer who is a member of that group. Especially, I think, in the current climate.
Maybe one or two more questions, or just about.
Have any more?
Looks like that's it, I think. Yep.
Thank you all.
Right. Well, thank you very much. Again, thanks to Jean and the Friends of the Malden Public Library. Thanks to you all for coming. And we wish you all obviously good luck in terms of your work. Keep going, keep the faith. And like Jason said, celebrate when you finish something.
Mm-hmm. Like this, we've just finished this.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Have a good night.
Thank you, Randy. Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Judah.
Great. Thanks, Jean.